we go. Okay, come back to the slideshow. So that first image of the migration I showed you was that sort of northern migration, which really takes 3 generations, or sort of 6 months of the year. So each of those generations only lives for about 2 months, but it's the fourth generation that actually lives for 6 months, which is quite unusual, I think, for butterflies. They fly all the way from Canada to Mexico, and they put all of their energy into building their flight muscles. They're actually like big babies. They enter diapause, which means that they're not sexually mature, and it's only in February that they become sexually mature, and then they start the journey north again to Texas, and it's mainly the females who already have fertilized eggs inside them that lay their eggs at the beginning of April, end of March, in Texas, and that whole journey starts all over again. My journey with monarch butterflies really began in 2015 when I was invited to CIMAS, which is the Mexican Center for Music and Sonic Arts in Morelia, which is about 4 hours drive west of Mexico City. I was invited by the director, Rodrigo Sigal, to give a talk and solo concert of my work there. And I was actually just talking to an ecologist friend of mine who mentioned the monarch butterfly. So you're going to Michoacan, and it's around about March, beginning of March. I think the monarch butterfly is going to be there. And they told me all about their migration, and I did a bit more research into them. And one of the things that fascinated me as a sound artist was the fact that as they swarm in their millions, they make this beautiful rushing sound. You know, it's unusual to think you can hear butterfly wings, but because they migrate in such large numbers, you can actually hear their wings flapping. And I thought this would be an amazing thing to record. So whilst I was there, I was able to go to the El Rosario Reserve and film and record the butterflies just on one day. And I managed to get some good footage, and I managed to record the sound of their rushing wings. And then it was actually about a year later that I got asked to create an installation based around flight for the Amy Johnson Festival in Hull. Amy Johnson from Hull was a famous aviatrix who was the first person actually to perform a solo flight from the UK to Australia. And in this festival is celebrating her life. And it was at that point that I decided to put all of this material together. I asked Alex Brooke at the University of Hull to create this wooden structure and design it for me. So what I wanted was something that resembled a bit like a hide in a forest where you might go to view birds, and in this case butterflies. And so there's 4 video screens inside it, and also 4 loudspeakers which surround you, sort of immerse you, in a sense kind of transport you to Mexico. So you're sort of surrounded in this way. And the sound component of the installation actually has 3 layers. One layer is field recordings, including the rushing sounds of thousands of tiny wings. And the other layer is a specially commissioned poem from Mexican poet Rolando Rodriguez, who has a beautiful speaking voice. And I asked him to write a poem in Spanish about the what we know about the scientific knowledge that we have about the monarch butterfly's migration and life cycle, but he's used that information but told it from a very emotive perspective, from the perspective of the butterflies themselves. And then finally there's a third sonic layer, which is a musical improvisation between myself, David Blink, who is a musician based in California, who we're going to hear from a little bit later on in this presentation, and also John Sanders, and that would combine flute, handpan and accordion, and they sort of use that layer to kind of fuse the other sonic layers together. We ended up actually, after presenting that in Hull, touring it around the UK, and then actually in different locations around the world. So that top picture there is actually at the Eden Project in Cornwall. We presented it there for 5 days. And then straight after that, we took it to the Shambhala Festival. I think that's maybe my most favourite presentation of the installation, because it was outside in the English woodlands, and you basically go from the English woodlands inside this hide and get sort of teleported to southern Mexico. We've also taken it to New York, and career and presented it in Brisbane as well. I should also say at this stage there's a number of people that sort of collaborated on this project, and all of the video footage was that I'd recorded was edited by Jessica Rodriguez, who is a Mexican artist but is now actually based in Canada. So she's kind of migrating with the monarchs, and she is actually going to be showing us a short VJ mix later on in this presentation as well. So thanks very much, Jessica. So again, those are some of the recent presentations. So it's really through the research that I've done in this project that I learned more about really some of the environmental impacts that the monarch butterflies are facing. And in fact, they're very much an indicator species of some of the damaging effects that we're having on ecosystems across that North American continent. So actually their numbers have decreased by nearly 90% over the last 2 decades. So a massive population reduction in a very short period of time. And we think there are sort of 3 main factors in this. One is industrial use of herbicides, particularly an issue in the Corn Belt in the US, where there's huge sort of amounts of land given over to growing corn, for example, and other crops. And the thing about corn is that it is wind pollinated rather than insect pollinated, so they're not too bothered about pollinators, pollinating species not being present. So basically they grow genetically modified corn, which is modified to withstand the herbicides such as Roundup, but it kills everything, including the milkweed, which is the only plants that the monarch butterflies larvae can eat. So no milkweed, no monarch butterflies. So industrial use of herbicides is one issue. Another issue is deforestation, particularly an issue in Mexico, because what happens there is the monarchs' metabolisms are actually very temperature dependent, and they don't like it too hot, they don't like it too cold, so they only when they overwinter in Mexico, they only roost in the oyamel trees, which only grow above 10,000 feet. So if you're looking at a sort of bird's eye view, you would see that the entire migratory population of monarch butterflies is squashed into just a few kilometers in the mountain peaks, basically. So their habitat is sort of very sensitive to changes there. And one of the issues there is that it's only been the monarch butterfly reserves have only been protected since the 1980s, but people have been logging in those rural areas for generations to earn a living, to get wood for fire and construction. But when the area was made protected, there weren't other sort of income streams kind of made available to people. So there's still a lot of logging that happens in those areas, including quite a lot of illegal logging. And then finally, as with everything, climate change also affects the monarch butterflies. And I was actually speaking to Lincoln Brower, who is the world leading authority on monarch butterflies, back in 2017. He sadly died in the middle of 2018. But he was telling me about one time after a freak storm, and obviously freak storms are occurring at an increasing rate due to climate change. After one of these freak storms, he was walking through 2 feet deep of monarch butterfly bodies. It was like walking through autumn leaves. So over the last few years, my research has moved into the domain of ecoacoustics and acoustic ecology, and looking at the ways that sound can enable us to glean information about the health of ecosystems. So in the 1970s, R. Murray Schafer in Vancouver at Simon Fraser University in Canada, set up the World Soundscape Project alongside colleagues such as Hildegard Westerkamp and Barry Truax, and that actually led out of the Vancouver Soundscape Project, where over several years they recorded sounds in different locations at particular intervals to monitor change over time. And they found that there was actually a decrease in certain bird species, there was an increase in anthropogenic noise, human-made sound. And then sort of later on, more recently, we have people like Bernie Krause, who has been working with ecologists such as Brian Pijanowski, and really using this sort of holistic soundscape way of listening to in a whole environment. That is to say, listening to the relationships between different sounds in a given environment. So he's an interesting person. He started his career as a musician, played with bands like The Doors, and then ended up getting into electronic music, and he had this kind of epiphany moment where he was recording sounds through a microphone on an island. And suddenly this whole world of the sort of biophony, all these different insects and birds, it was like putting a sort of microscope onto these sounds. And he actually then changed the course of his career, did a PhD in bioacoustics, worked for the Forestry Commission in the United States, and over the last 50 years has been recording pristine environments all over the world. He's got sort of three sort of main categories that we can think about in terms of starting to analyze soundscapes. So there's the biophony, all of the sounds made in a soundscape by organisms which communicate via sound. There's the geophony, which is all of the sounds naturally occurring in an environment that aren't made by organisms such as rain or the sound of the waves. And then finally anthropophony, which is human-made sound. Bernie Krause has sort of developed this acoustic niche hypothesis, partly coming out of his training as a musician. What we're looking at now is a sonogram, which is showing the different frequency bands, so the lower frequencies at the bottom, the higher frequencies at the top. This was in Borneo, in Camp Liki, and we can see that there are insects with cicadas at the top, then two different species of birds, and then gibbons right down at the bottom. And what he's found is it's almost like a musical score, that he's found this all the way around the world, and there are many other people working in the same sort of domain that are finding the same thing, that in any given biome, it appears that all of the different species in that biome have evolved to communicate across narrow bandwidths of frequencies which don't overlap with each other. So they're finding their own acoustic niches within the frequency spectrum. And one sort of dramatic example, I think, of how sound can be used to sort of monitor the health of the ecosystem is this example from Lincoln Meadow in the Sierra Nevada mountains, where Bernie Krause went there. This is Sierra Nevada mountains in California. In 1988, they were starting to do selective logging in this area. So chopping down some trees here and there rather than whole swathes of them. And so the idea is that you're minimizing impact. So he actually went there 6 months before logging. He took a photograph, which you can see here on the screen, and then he also took a sound recording. He then went back 6 months after logging, took another photograph. It looked pretty much the same, but sound told a very different story. So this is the sonogram 6 months before logging, and we see it's a very sort of rich acoustic environment, lots of different species communicating across different bandwidths. And then 6 months after logging, a very different picture. So this is actually a lone woodpecker, and I believe he's been back there approximately 25 times, approximately 15 times over the last 25 to 30 years, and he's saying that it still hasn't recovered. So I was wondering, could we use sound as a data stream for scientists and to use, and also to raise awareness about these changing soundscapes across the migratory routes of the monarch butterflies? We know that their numbers are decreasing dramatically. They're an indicator species, though. If their numbers are in decline, surely there are other pollinators and other insects and bird species that are being affected. Can we use sound as a means of monitoring this? So actually on that same visit, when I went to Mexico in 2015, I then went to Arizona to the Balance Unbalance festival, and I met Grant Smith from Sound Camp, and it was at that point that I got switched on to live streaming. So rather than taking sound recordings as sort of sampled periods of time, we could do remote sensing. We can put a stream box in a given location, and then we can tap into that data stream at any time we want. Or if we have a big enough server, we can record huge amounts of data from that and listen in. And also you can share that easily with anyone in the world. Anyone that's got internet can join onto that. And so we linked with the Serra Pelone UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, and also with Leah Bartley's UNESCO Biosphere Soundscapes program, and specifically the biome wing of that, which is she's actually installing stream boxes in different UNESCO Biosphere reserves around the world to monitor change over time in these reserves. And as this Cerro Pelon is a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, it very much sort of fits in with that. We've been collaborating with Sound Camp, who have been making wonderful stream boxes for us to use, and Locus Sonus, of course. So we're broadcasting the streams via the Locus Sonus map, and also the butterflies and their people arborists. These are people who are trained to become stewards of the forest. There were 3 when we first started going there, actually back in 2018, and there are now 6, and you can actually donate to this. I'll share a link to our Following the Flight of the Monarchs website on the chat in a second, and I'll also, on that website, it's not there at the moment, but I'll put a link to the donation page for the arborists. And actually a couple of the arborists used to be loggers, but they're now being paid to conserve the environment there. I also talked to Lincoln Brower in 2017. Because we can hear this rushing sound of the monarch's wings, could we actually monitor potentially their behavior by listening into that rushing sound of the wings? Maybe even could use machine listening to recognize that sound. And he thought that was an interesting proposal. And also we can use the streams to listen into those different birds and insect species and monitor change in that sort of biodiversity over time. So I went there in 2018 along with monarch specialist Dr. Pablo Jaramillo Lopez, who has been a huge part of the project. He's really linked me up with all of the other people across the migratory routes, and I've learnt so much about monarch butterflies. It's still a fraction of his knowledge, but we went there with Pablo and also with David Blink, and this is a recording, should be there, of this is a video. I actually recorded this with a sound-filled microphone, but you can see those monarchs swarming there. Really sort of amazing sight. And like the Lincoln Meadow example, this is actually a meadow that the butterflies fly down to drink water and nectar from flowers. When it gets hot enough, they can only fly in direct sunlight, so they need to warm up first. But this is the meadow without the monarch butterflies there, so you can hear what it sounds like when they're not there. And now with the butterflies. but hopefully you can hear there that crackling, rustling sound of the wings. Zoom audio isn't quite as good as the original sound files, but you get an idea. So now getting onto the live streaming, we actually took a Streambox, well, I took one in my luggage along to the reserve, and we managed to hike up a couple of very heavy solar-powered solar batteries and solar panels, and using a 4G router to link to a mobile phone network to get a mobile phone stream working there. So these are the live streams sort of on the sound map, and I'll show you those in a second. This is Franco Ramirez, who really helped us a lot with finding the right patch on the mountain where we had enough 4G, actually 3G signal in this case, sunlight, and where the monarchs actually flew. This is our elated faces, the first time we actually managed to get the stream working and enough signal. This is what the Streambox looks like inside, or did anyway. It's got a Raspberry Pi computer, charge controller, microphone in either side. These are both binaural, well, omnidirectional microphones, and with the box in the middle, sort of almost acting like a virtual head. So you get a binaural sound image. So that's a kind of 3D sound image. So you definitely get the best experience listening through headphones, and it's a little bit like putting your head onto the side of the mountains and you're surrounded by the sounds there. Then we've got this solar battery in here and the 4G router. This is Jeff, who actually is a keen hiker and found the final perfect location. And there, just to prove it, we actually got it on the sound map. This is what it looks like on the side of the mountain with the solar panel, and that's what the view looks like looking the other way. We took a recording from the stream in January, end of January 2018, and shared it with ornithologists at UNAM, the Autonomous University of Mexico, where Pablo works, and they're actually able to identify all of these different bird species from that recording, including a couple of predators of the monarchs. So another thing that we were doing in the reserve was playing musical performances amongst the butterflies. This is David Blink playing the handpan amongst the butterflies there. You can see some in the background drinking dew from the ground. And we're going to try a very short performance in a second between himself on the handpan in Mount Shasta in California, and Tristan on the guitar, and also myself on flute, and Jessica on live video. We did a number of recorded performances in the reserve, including live poetry from Rolando, and it's very much sort of inspired by composer David Dunn. His sort of rather well-known piece Nexus 1 for 3 trumpets in the Grand Canyon, interacting with the acoustic and other sounds in the environment. And this is a sort of an example of myself and David. David is on trumpet on this recording, and myself on flute. And the reverberance that you hear on this, it hasn't been added afterwards. This is all what you hear in that valley. So in the interest of time, I'm going to come out of that for a second. Whoops. And share the screen again. We're going to show you the... actually, I'm not going to do that. In the chat, I'm going to copy and paste a load of URLs. You should have the URLs of the 5 streams there. So like I was saying, if you copy and paste each one of those individually, that'll bring up the different streams, and we kind of go from Canada down to Mexico and then over to California. So you can listen along with those with me if you want. I'm just going to share my screen again now and just tune into those streams very briefly. So if I bring this up now, like I say, we've got that stream in Mexico that we installed in 2018. I also went to Point Pelee National Park in Canada, in Leamington, Ontario, which is this knife-edge peninsula jutting out into Lake Erie, one of the Great Lakes, and we have a stream box on the roof there, and that's what it sounds like. So I'm getting a little bit of interference, I think, possibly caused by sort of bandwidth with Zoom. But if you listen to those on your own computers, your own devices, with the links that I sent you, you should get better quality there. I'm also collaborating with Kipper Peak State Park on the Virginia Eastern Shores with the Coastal Virginia Wildlife Observatory, and we're also collaborating with sound artist Vaughan Garland there, and he's very kindly set up a temporary stream in his back garden at the moment, and this is what it sounds like. And if you listen very carefully, he actually has a couple of beehives in his back garden, and you might be able to, I think I can pick out some bees here in the background. And if we go down to Texas, we're going to be working with Rebecca Quinion. This is a citizen scientist coordinator and medical specialist in Austin, Texas. And there's already a stream box there being run by Joel Goodwin, which you can listen to here. We're hoping to install another box in Austin, Texas. And then down in Mexico, this is quite quiet at the moment, so you might need to turn the volume up a little bit for this one. I know I do. It is there. If you turn it up, you can hear some birds there at the moment. Now moving over to the west coast. So the majority of the monarch butterflies migrate up and down the eastern seaboard of the United States, but there's also a smaller population that migrates up and down the west coast. So we have Trevor Herbert running Jasper Ridge's birdcast from their biosphere preserve there, run by Stanford University. And finally, in share the screen from Jessica. She may be able to start doing some video. We're doing some telematic performances where we're linking different musicians. So, for example, I can start singing with musicians. to the, whoops, hang on. Thanks very much to David and Tristan there for playing that. And I'll just come back to the final slides. So one of the things that we're looking to use is Dan Stoll's Warbler app, which uses machine listening to identify different bird species. That's been running in the UK for quite a while. It's a free app that you can download, and they're now got a version running in North American continent as well. There's a database for that. So we're hoping to link with lots of citizen scientists who will be able to listen to those different streams, and we can start to build up a database of different bird species that people can hear, and hopefully monitor change over time, as well as using the streams in artworks and performances that raise awareness of the issues that the monarchs face and also raise. Another part of it is going to be touring installation, or touring exhibition I should say. So this is an exhibition we set up at the British Science Festival in Hull in 2018. So we had the hide there, but also a touchscreen with information and recordings. We had the live stream. We also had some work by Vaughan Garland, where he'd interviewed different people and had field recordings about different pollinating species, and also a film by Anna Chahanyu, who has documented beautifully, really highlighting those three issues that I told you about of industrial use of herbicides, climate change, and the deforestation. This is actually a monarch that froze overnight on the mountain. I'm putting together a 30-minute radio program for BBC Radio 3. That was going to be in June, but it's been pushed back to the end of the year due to the COVID-19 situation. But do look out for that. And we also have a website, which I'll put into the chat as the very last thing. It's also on the Reveil project page. I was going to open this up to questions, but I think I may be out of time for this meeting. Or if people want to, you can just use the same link and come back into this meeting. So if people have the time, you're very welcome to come back and join me. This is about to end in a second, and we can maybe have a chat for about 10 minutes, and I can also invite Jessica and potentially Pablo to join us in the talks as well, if people want to do that. But does anyone have any questions at this stage? No? Well, thanks very much, everyone, for listening. There's the Following the Flight of the Monarchs link. I hope everything worked okay and you could hear it all. And like I say, I'll be here. If you use that same link that you just clicked on, once this session ends, I'll be here for the next sort of 10-15 minutes, and I'll be very happy to sort of answer any questions. You can either type in the chat box, or you can just speak to me. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for
thank you, Rob.
Thank you. Well, it's saying less than a minute upgrade, but like the less than a minute seems to be going on for a very long time. So if anyone does have any questions,